year. This year, with the help of Reverend Jazzy Bostock from the Native Hawaiian Ministry Task Force, we applied for and received a Creation Care grant from the Episcopal Church. With this grant money, along with Mary Carpenter and Dr. Joseph Epic from Huli Plenary, which is the Reconciliation Task Force, and Father Kelly Abegi and Deacon Monty Bowman, also from the Native Hawaiian Ministry Task Force, we have planned a year-long emphasis on creation care, which will weave its way through the diocesan events of the year. These events include spring training today, a virtual summer speaker series, and a Mālama ʻāina volunteer event for Education Day before Diocesan Convention. We have called this year-long project Huli, which means to turn, to change, to reverse course as a manner of living. It is also the part of the kalo plant that is replanted. Huli then is a project to turn our hearts and hands and minds to the ground and water beneath us, to the diversity of voices around us, and to Indigenous and Native Hawaiian wisdom, particularly in this place. Amidst the changes in the U.S. administration, our priority and call remains the same, to turn our lives to care for what God made and called good, and to do so with attention to this place and to the people around us. This is the hope and work of Huli for this year. So there's a handout here with more information about these events, along with a QR code or link to follow to our webpage, which will have updated information as it becomes available. We are excited, August 2nd, save the date, to welcome author, botanist, and member of the Potawatomi Nation, Robin Wall-Kimmerer, as one of our summer speakers, along with the Kanaka visionary, teacher, and author, Dr. Kamana Beamer. If you would like the original file of the handout, they're half page, that if you want to use it for a bulletin insert, please let me or Ray know and we can send that to you. If you'd like a copy of the handout that has all this information, I can pass those out as well. So we thank Ray, Sybil, and the diocesan support staff who are helping us with our planning for the year. With that, welcome to our first event of Huli, Spring Training. And Jazzy will introduce our first plenary speaker.
Good morning, aloha mai kakou. We are so thrilled that Dr. Jonathan Kay Kamakawiwoʻole Osorio said yes to our invitation. He is Dean of Hawaiinuiākea School of Hawaiian Knowledge. Dr. Osorio received his PhD in history from the University of Hawaii. At Kamakawiwoʻole, he has developed and taught classes in history, literature, law as culture, music as historical texts, and research methodologies for and from Indigenous people. His recent publications include The Value of Hawaii, Knowing the Past and Shaping the Future, which he co-edited and authored, and Dismembering Lahui, A History of the Hawaiian Nation to 1887. He is also a composer and singer and has been a Hawaiian music recording artist since 1975. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jonathan Osorio.
Bree said pretty much everything I wanted to say. So I'll just sing this. I did spend, it's a strange way that I put this talk together, and I'm going to try to keep it under 35 minutes.
Your mic is off.
It's just not close. Okay. Can you hear me? Yes. All right. So I'm not sure if I can properly describe what the last few months have been for people in education, and some of you probably know firsthand. Here in Hawaii, there's just been a lot of people meeting and new organizing, and fearfulness, anxiety, but also a sense of mission and a sense of new visions. And it calls for people to put their plan forward. So in the midst of many different kinds of meetings, some of them with institutions and some of them with community groups, I've tried to understand what I wanted to speak to you about in this place, in this kind of church community steeped in the gospel. So I'm not open. And in the midst of all of it, the other thing that really has been more sustaining than anything else has been music, over and over and over again. Configuring the things that I'm seeing, the things that I feel anxious about, and the things that I hope for in songs. I'm going to begin with two hymns. They were both written very close to each other. The song by the Queen was written in 1866 as a national anthem for the kingdom. Huli Plenary wrote this at the behest of the king, Kamakawiwoʻole, who was a member of his church. And the other song was composed at the very dawn of the 20th century by James Weldon Johnson and his brother Rosamond Johnson. And eventually, it was a poem written by Johnson, and eventually became a hymn that is often referred to as the Black National Anthem. About 6 weeks ago, I started thinking about the ways in which the lyrics of both of these songs, when understood in English, are almost identical. And how not the tempo, not the rhythm of the song, but the melodies are similar. So let's see how that works. Lift every voice and sing, till earth and heaven ring with the harmony of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound down as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of faith that darkness has taught us. Sing a song full of hope that the desert has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Kamakua managoa, Haliu mai yamaho, e haliu akune, e kana. Bless our feet straight from the places of God and empty. Bless our hearts from the wine of the world. Get thee, shadow beneath thy hand. May we forever stand true to our God, true to our native land. convinced that nothing can ever separate us from God's love. Neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither our fears for today nor our worries about tomorrow, not even the powers of hell can separate us from God's love. Romans 8. It seems so appropriate to begin any talk before I say this. I didn't finish this. And you're going to know when I'm no longer reading the text, because I'll look at you and I'll be more uncertain, and I'll say crazier things. It seems so appropriate to begin any talk in this place with confession. So I confess that I was putting off preparing for this training until Jasmine contacted me late last week. She and I both revealed what these times are doing to our sensibilities, to our ability to calm ourselves, our mental well-being. And we are not necessarily the ones being threatened with loss of jobs, of needed government services. We are not the ones afraid to reveal our countries of origin, our political and even our spiritual convictions. Nevertheless, we needed to remind each other that God blesses us every day, indeed every moment. I want us all here to think about the people in communities scattered across this great ʻāina. I want us to focus for this time together on poor families, working class families, mothers and fathers, infants and elders, school-aged children who are undernourished and whose healthcare network is unraveling around them. I want us to think about gay, lesbian, transgender people, God's loving creations, and consider their anxiety and fear in the face of this monstrous social discourse that seeks to extinguish them, to deny them humanity. And let us think of their parents and siblings who are facing the loss of a job and dread of the loss of shelter. And these are all things that are happening around us in Hawaii. But we must look further, past the horizon, to American cities and college campuses, where young men and women are seized by masked employees of the United States, kidnapped and removed from their families and communities, and sent to prisons far away. You may take a moment to rage at your country for perpetrating these evils, but not for long, because your attention, our attention, belongs with people. Look further away and see the consequences of brutal and powerful men in armies in Gaza and Ukraine, and consider the suffering of these children of God, the massacres and tortures, and the certain knowledge that this is only the beginning of their suffering. And if you can still feel the love of God after this, then you are ready to get to the real work of God's church. Jesus' message was always revolutionary and always come from his understanding that God is love. And it is becoming clear to many of us social and political activists that our role in this time of fear and violence is to feed, to house, to minister to the sick and the crazy, and with our voices and our bodies, to organize for social and political reform. The path that America and so many other nations have followed, to extract wealth from the earth, labor from the helpless, and pointless consumption from the rest of us lucky ones, is a path that now reveals its guardrails. We have surrendered so much to this capitalist dream. Our connections to our families, communities, and we long ago surrendered our sacred ties to the land. So to reform our societies and rescue humanity's place on the earth, we have some considerable work to do. And it actually begins with what I asked from you at the beginning of this. Look at our people. These past 6 or 7 weeks, I've become a participant in numerous meetings with people in nonprofits, public education, Hawaiian trust organizations, and just audiences of people attending forums and panels directed at helping us understand the drastic political change taking place in America and considering tactics and strategies to deal with those changes. In every circumstance, I try to remind people that this uncertainty and the fear of being government targets because of our specific work, because of our words, because of our beliefs, may be new and frightful to most of us in Hawaii, but that fear is quite commonplace in many communities around the world, including communities in the United States. It may be especially fearful that government agencies are attending to our words and actions with implied and explicit threats. But we should remember that countless communities in Hawaii that over the past century were condemned, removed, sometimes burned to the ground, or subject to landfill that destroyed taro and rice ponds and other gardens their previous owners left to fend for themselves. So I think that the question of reconciliation today takes on a new meaning in Hawaii as we consider the harms that will come first to the unsheltered and the poor, the chronically ill or underemployed. Our aim cannot be to simply unseat the present government and go back to where we were, say, in 2015. We are where we are today because even the most principled among us could not say no to the abundance, the glut of production, wealth, and comforts of the last century. For over 50 years now, Native Hawaiians led protests of evictions, of devastations by the military, of the desecration of lands by industrial projects like geothermal or astronomy, and wind farms, and the expansion of tourism. All of these protests joined by allies in the community, but generally treated as nuisance or pointless attempts to stave off the inevitable. These are the spaces where our churches should have always been. Encouraging, nurturing, feeding, and defending. The federal government now makes environmental justice and global warming unacceptable phrases with explicit promises to punish organizations, even schools and teachers who dare to speak of them. So the task of reconciling to our earth is now even more critical, even as it has become more personally risky to undertake. But as I think of the hundreds of people I have known who have sacrificed careers, safety, reputations, sometimes even family life to engage in the struggle, I am pretty certain that I know why they are not afraid in this moment. So here we are. That's all I wrote. And I want to focus in on something deeply personal and hopefully bring this talk to an end that makes sense to all of us. I have a daughter, Jamaica, Kalani Osorio. She is in her late 20s now. I'm sorry, she's over 30 now. I'm pretty sure, I was thinking of another daughter. She's in her early 30s. She is a particularly vulnerable space because, first, she's a queer woman with children and a spouse. She is also a professor in indigenous politics at the University of Hawaii. And she takes all of these kinds of vulnerabilities and then just steps up to make sure that everybody understands what she believes, so that she is also a leader in the movement to end Israel's occupation of Gaza. She is also very much a leader and very outspoken, and has made herself a target on that campus, a target even for our administration. And as her father and as a dean in this very same university, I can't begin to tell you how difficult a task it is for me to shut my mouth about what she is doing. And even more, basically just lean into that task because I know that what she is doing is good and right. The only way I feel I can protect her, which is so much a part of my being, is to become more visible myself. Do you know what I mean?
Yep. Yep.
So, I'm thinking about the protests across the street this afternoon, and how it's important for us to show up to these things and to be supportive. And I just think that that is something that more and more people will engage in, and to turn to the role of the church in these times. I want to say, it's not our job to lead those protests. It's not our job to do anything more than to be there. We should be putting up tents and feeding people and supplying water. We should provide access to health care. We should have people. What the church has always been able to do has been to marshal resources. And we have reason to marshal them now. I do not think it is the church's job anymore to remind people to be faithful to God. I think it's our job to help people find God in the struggles of their lives. It seems like 35 minutes. I do think, as I bring this to close, that is something that is so nested so deeply in me because of the way I was brought up, because of the church that I was raised in. This idea of our responsibility. That in this perilous time, I do not feel fearful of the future. I feel a tremendous opportunity for this society to be changed. And changed in a way that brings the very most vulnerable of our people to the forefront, to create a society that is safe for them, because if it is, then it is safer for the rest of us. And how we do this is just a continual, daily integration, a daily meeting up with people, conversations, encouragement, money, organization, all of those things that churches have always been able to do. And who knows, maybe in the bringing of our people back to a sense of mission, actually a mission that starts with a genuine and open and unencumbered love for all of our creatures and for this earth. Maybe with that kind of vision, we can start the growth of this amazing gospel that Jesus began more than 2,000 years ago. I'll finish with this song. This is, my wife Mary has always been just amazing at making me do songs that she likes. I'd never heard of David Wilcox. before she made me listen to this song. And it was, I know the first time I played this song was actually, she made me learn it for a friend of ours who lost her daughter in a domestic violence killing. And we were asked to come to the funeral and for me to sing something appropriate. So I sang this. I want to leave you with it. I want to thank Jazzy and Bree and this and this diocese, the Episcopal Church, the ELCA. These are organizations that the congregational churches. These are the organizations that have always had a conscience that has shaped the better part of our natures, in my opinion. And I'm grateful. I'm grateful for the work that you've done. I'm really excited about the work ahead. You should be, because this earth and our people have known these kinds of times before. Brutal, violent, terrible times, fearful times. And we need to be that light again. This song is called Show the Way. Say you see no reason to believe the world will ever change. Saying love is foolish to believe there'll always be some crazy army or a knife to wake you from your daydream. Put the fear back in your life. Look, if someone wrote a play just to glorify what's stronger than hate, would they not arrange the stage? Look as though the hero came to play, almost in defeat. It's looking like the evil side will win, on the edge of every seat. The moment that the whole scene begins, it is love who makes the mortar. It's love who stacked these stones, and it's love who set the stage here. Though it looks like we're alone in this scene set in shadow, like the night is here to stay. There is evil cast around us, and it's love who wrote the play. This darkness, love will show the way. Now the stage is set. Feel your own heart beating in your chest. This life's not over yet. So we get up on our feet and do our best. Play against the fear. Play against the reasons not to try. We're playing for the tears burning in the happy angel's eyes. It is love who makes the mortar, and it's love who stacked these stones, and it's love who set the stage here. Though it looks like we're alone in this scene set in shadow, like the night is here to stay. There is evil cast around us. It's love who wrote the play. In this darkness, love will show the way. Show the way. she wanted me to just speak for like this period of time and then I'll open this up for conversation, I think. And that is actually what we have to do more and more of this. Not simply just ask questions, but really offer ways ahead. And it has to come from people. So let's do that. Anybody want to say anything? Yes.
I'm just wondering if someone got taken away right next to us, you know, or any government official, like that woman from Tufts University, what can we do? What can we do as far as speak for that person, or maybe get the information from that person to contact their close relatives and friends? What would you suggest?
I'm going to tell you what people are talking about on college campuses now, at least the ones I know about. And one of those things is trying to set up resources that will be attentive to the people who are vulnerable, and making certain that they always have accompaniment, that they're always that they are protected to the very limits of what people can do to protect others. To be witnesses, certainly, when people are seized, to really hold universities and other institutions accountable for being complicit when people are taken. I mean, you know, I could talk more about this in terms of what university administration feels, because I am an administrator and I hear these conversations. The fact of the matter is that it wasn't just the money that made Columbia cave the way it did. It was an automatic fear of an institution as powerful as the American government training its sights on them. That's what it was, and it was really an attempt to basically distance themselves from the very legitimate kinds of protests that were, we're talking about the deaths just the other day of another 112, mostly women and children in Gaza. It's their unwillingness to see that that was the most important thing, but these are the most important things, than business as usual. I don't know any other way of doing the kind of protection you're talking about than people organizing and providing community resources. In California, a beloved friend of mine who is a Lutheran pastor in Southern California, back at the very beginning of this scare, months ago, organized a community meeting where she brought in attorneys to talk to the people of her, not just her congregation, but people in the community around that congregation who are, some of them are not citizens, right? And she brought them all into this place to get instruction on how to deny access to ICE agents when they come to your house, what their rights are, advising them. And she told me in the week before she held the event how frightened she was that by doing this she may have exposed them all to risk. You know, these are not easy things. As it turns out, you know, the meeting was successful, and a blessed event. But think about the courage it took for her to conceive it. And by the way, that's why I'm not telling you her name. Not even consult her church council when she did it. I tell you, those kinds of acts of courage, again, are some of the things that inspire, that they make you realize that you have no other choice but to do exactly what you think you need to do. Yes.
So, you talked about Colombia being afraid of the attention being trained on them in particular, and we see it now happening with Brown University and Johns Hopkins is having to Harvard, picking out of these institutions, and the fear that this pastor had of holding something like that, which we one of our churches has happened as well. Do you think that power of numbers is a protection for folks? I mean, I know Columbia has been singled out, but if all of the universities refuse to stop DEI, do all the things that they're being asked to do, they can't go after everyone, right? I mean, they can take away money, but they can't stop a groundswell of people doing the right thing.
I think that broadening of this movement and bringing more and more people into it is the only protection we have. But it's also, it also turns out to be exactly the right thing to do. I always think about the way that those of us who have lived really, really privileged lives, and I certainly have, who own our homes, who had this remarkable stability, good health plans, all of those things. I wonder how we participate this in ways that really require us to understand that we may be needing, that those things are at risk. And maybe it's easier when you down to my age. Right, Lenny? Yeah, because we're classmates. Maybe it's easier when you get to our age when you realize that your whole life has been just this amazing thing. It must be for something.
Yeah.
It has to be for something. It couldn't have been that I spent all of this time on this earth just simply to be comfortable. And when I see younger people risk their futures and the safety of their younger families, there's no kind of getting around it. So yes, I feel like that's what I'm doing right now. And it's exactly why I'm willing to meet with anybody and go anywhere. You should see my calendar, it's pretty insane. And the university doesn't know yet. Well, they're not really, they know that I'm not, they can't find me a lot of times. The university doesn't even know how much of my time is going into these meetings, into these organizations. And I feel like I'm doing the university's work for it. Because, ultimately it's going to have to develop a spine. And one of the ways that we give spine to our institutions is by people in mass organizing and crying out. So, yeah, Stephen's another classmate. I don't know why there's so many old people here.
that I have personally, and hope that maybe I can get some wisdom from everybody, and that is the biggest fear that I have now is that the administration that we have now is moving at astonishing speed in all directions. I mean, it is, in a macabre sort of way, I have to give them credit for just how fast they are moving in many, many directions. And I think, you know, what I see now are starting around, some of the stuff that I think you're talking about are that people are now kind of moving up and taking responsibility, but it's doing it in pockets everywhere against this force that is very, very focused. And that is probably my greatest concern. And it is what it is, but I guess two things. The groundswell that I think that you're talking about is one thing that is good. The other thing that I'm hearing is that maybe the institutions that we have depended on for a long time are the ones that are supposed to be in the business of stopping some of this activity seem to be a little slow on the draw. And it's like, but we don't have, that's, I'm expressing nothing probably like this. I'm simply bringing it up. It's something that concerns me a lot. And I don't know what the answer to it is. You know, we have to deal with the situation as it is now. But I don't know. I'm looking for magic answers.
I don't want to be flippant here, but you know, institutions have always been pretty good about taking care of themselves, about protecting themselves. And what I'm talking about here is something a little bit different, because we're actually talking about real people. And I'd be willing to bet that in the work that you do, you come into contact with a lot more people who are in those vulnerable spaces, even than I do. You're right that we don't have the advantage of being able to move as quickly as the federal government is. But I will say that what Washington is doing, which is basically acting on an impulse of actually a number of different kinds of impulses that seem to stem from the minds of a couple of people who truly don't have any kind of calculated future in mind except making certain that the very wealthiest people are better situated than they already are. I don't think that is something that will produce anything particularly efficient. It's destructive. And there are things that will probably not be able to be rebuilt institutionally that have been really important safeguards. So we have to find other things and other ways to protect. We have to reach other resources. We have to do what that federal government is saying they will not do, and whose actions are going to make sure that even if this government is overturned in the next year and a half, or in the next 3.5 years, so much damage will have been done to these departments that honestly we're going to be dealing with a very different kind of reality anyway. So the time for building is now, and it starts with communities that have the faith, the trust of its people. And, you know, nonprofits are wonderful organizations, but they don't necessarily have, you know, a congregation. They don't have that same kind of relationship as important as they are. So, where are you going to find this? You're going to find this in the schools. You're going to find this in the churches. You're going to find that in these kinds of organizations, and that's what I'm saying. And it's not. This isn't ideal. It is not ideal. It's possible that we might have been able to do this institutionally 2 or 3 decades ago. It's possible by making different political choices, economic choices. We might have been able to create a society that was better. But we didn't. And this is what we are. Yes, sir.
What happens when you see an injustice? A lot of times you call 911, call the police, do something about it. In this case, we call the Attorney General, who represents us as a state. So what has the Attorney General been doing? Let me just briefly. March 14th, Attorney General Lopez wins temporary block on mass firing of federal probationary employees, fired employees into jobs back. It's good. March 24th, Attorney General Lopez leads fight to stop President Trump from shutting down the Department of Education, and on and on and on. The Attorney Generals throughout the country are pushing back, and they're winning. There's an organization called Defenders of the Democracy. Yeah, lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit against the Trump administration, and they're winning. 85% of the cases are stopping what the Trump administration do. He's getting a view to say, well, why are you guys not doing this? In the meantime, stop mass violence. So in our case, as citizens, don't call 911, call the Attorney General, complain to them, like there is something going on that we don't like. We don't represent the government, they represent us. So, that fight is on. We're getting strength. We're winning. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't disagree with political organizing, and there are people who are talking about, you know, helping to bring this kind of message into the legislature over the next few years, and I think that's really important work. I do. But I came here this morning to speak to this church, and you know what this church does, and other churches do. Because I think that we are pretty well situated to begin that kind of work. I'm a historian. As a graduate student, I was forced to read Tacitus. Forced. But at least it was in English. Tacitus and others talking about the collapsing Roman Empire. Talked about the ways in which these new Christian churches in Rome and in the empire were taking over what government had once done, what the economy had once done. Feeding, clothing, educating. We know what that became eventually, and it was oppressive, but in those days, 300, 400 AD, the churches were a blessing. That's always stayed with me, that notion of where that help, where that nurturing, that feeding comes from. It was a simple message today, and I do think that the courts should stand up to this president. I I don't know what happens if the president disregards them. Everybody's waiting to see where this all plays out. Regardless of what they do, I think that there is a task for us. Yes?
I'm about to be in a play in Hilo about Prince Kuhio. So I brought my script with me. We've got rehearsal tomorrow. But one of the characters that I play is Liliu Opalani. And she is speaking to Kuhio. And after listening to you, I'm hearing this same message come out, so if I may. She's speaking to Kuhio and her two other nephews had a ball, and she says, you see all this around you, this palace, these crowns and jewels, grown women, men, and medals and shining swords, even our titles, king, queen, princess, and prince. This is not who we really are. I mean, we are these things in these modern days, but only because we are ali'i. Underneath all this glitter and finery, we are ali'i. And you know what that means. And they go, what? Auntie, what? And one of her responds and says, yes, because that's our mana. And she says, yes, yes, I know you've heard all these things, but today of all days, I want to remind you, you must never, ever forget that as ali'i, your most solemn duty is to our people, to the well-being of the Hawaiian people, even in these times, especially in these hard and troubled times. They still look to us for protection and guidance. That is what you are born to as ali'i. The true ali'i not only feels all the sufferings of his people, but his own disgrace if he fails them as well. That is why we always must do everything in our power to alleviate suffering. And so, even though today you are, or there were made princes, this is when Kuhio became a prince, you always were and always will be ali'i. So, we are leaders in our church. So, I hear, because as ali'i, we're the leaders before the overthrow. That's what we need to do as well, is that we need to alleviate suffering. That's what you're saying. True? You know?
Yeah. I'm not sure how long we're allowed to keep this.
One more question?
Oh, sure. And
Inspired by the last speaker, by that, can you give us any of your insight? You know, one of the themes of our year is to learn from the wisdom of our ancestors, from those who come before us. So as a historian, do you have words of wisdom, like,
yeah, right. That's a perfect. And thank you. You're going to be playing Liliu in this?
Hi.
In this play.
One of 5. Is more
So,
important.
let's talk about Liliu for a minute. I've actually I wrote a sermon for one of the reconciliation projects here at least 15 years ago, about 20 years ago. And for the first time I was sort of forced to think about really what Liliu did in January of 1893. So I'll just quickly bring this together. So Liliu was queen. It means that she was, as monarch, and under a constitution that had been forced on her brother, David Kalakaua, in 1887. That constitution basically severely limited her executive power. The kingdom government before had always, it had had a balance, where the courts were independent, the legislature was elected, part of the legislation was appointed, but it was always a smaller part of the legislature. The larger part was, and had always been elected. And then there was the king. And that was severely changed in 1887. So the Queen really didn't have any executive power. She was pretty much at the mercy of her cabinet. She could select a cabinet, but the cabinet had to, I don't know, it was crazy. I'm kind of getting off the point here. How amazing she was. The Constitution of the kingdom at that point did not serve really anybody. It didn't have the guidance of a real executive, and her own people had been opposed to it and were continually appealing to her to reinstate the old Constitution. For about a year in 1892, she tried to get her cabinet to agree that a new constitution was needed. And every time she had a cabinet that seemed favorable to it, the House of Representatives, the legislature, would vote that cabinet out of existence. So she finally was able to get a cabinet that said that they supported it. Just at the close of the legislative session. And when she closed the legislative session so the legislature could not meet, she thought she had the opportunity at that point to declare a new constitution that was fair to everyone, that still allowed business interests to have a predominant role here, but restored people's ability to vote. And when she did this small group of American businessmen, mostly American, Europeans, formed themselves into a cabal, contacted the American the American representative here, the equivalent of an ambassador, and requested that troops be landed to protect them as they declared themselves to the government. That minister called on the captain of the ship, the USS Boston, and the Boston brought a company of men ashore. They were armed with, with rifles and Gatling guns. And they set up a line between the palace and the building where these men were, and where they had declared themselves the legitimate government. The Queen was advised by her marshal to immediately, as soon as the men had announced that they were the new government, to arrest them for treason. And she said, but what about the American troops between us? Her marshal said, under laws, under their own laws, they cannot interfere. But if they do, we should shoot them down. Queen's response was to tell her own men to lay down their weapons. And she did this because she knew enough about Americans to know that if she shot or killed any of their soldiers, sailors, that another ship would soon be in the harbor and they would lay waste to the city. She knew this as surely as she knew anything. But consider what she did. She disarmed herself. She surrendered to the United States, which did not take her into custody. They left her to the Committee of Safety. She could not have known what her own fate would be. She could not know that she would be taken somewhere and killed, or imprisoned for the rest of her life. And in fact, the original government did imprison her for a short period of time. What kind of leader does that? What sort of person takes complete responsibility for the lives of the men who were supposed to be protecting her, and puts her own life in jeopardy. She said this to her soldiers. It is not because I didn't think you would fight and defend me, but that I did not want any more bloodshed. That's the kind of leadership we're talking about. It's not just rare, it's almost non-existent. And we are the people who are alive today because of what she did. We are the people who still have the ability to say the same kinds of things she said, to appeal for justice, for honesty, for goodness, for kindness, for forbearance. We're alive today to do that.